to focus on. I'm Zanella Morrison, and today we dive into the most urgent and complex challenges facing Africa today, and that's youth unemployment. The education system is struggling to keep pace with the rapid evolution of technology and the changing needs of the job market, from outdated curricula to under-resourced institutions and critical misalignment between what the students are learning and what employers are needing. And the crack in the system is widening. So for this reason, CNBC Africa is hosting the 2025 Future of Education Summit in September. And the University of the Western Cape is the anchor partner for the event. And the theme this year is Bridging the Academia and Industry Gap, the Future of Workforce Readiness. And joining me now to expand further on this conversation is Professor Robert Balfour, Rector and Vice Chancellor at the University of the Western Cape. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. Let's look at the lens of the Western Cape and how the Western Cape is positioning itself to answer some of the questions and the challenges that we are going to be talking about for academia.
Yes, thanks so much, Zanella. I think the Western Cape is an education hub in our country. There are a unique combination of TVET and other colleges, as well as the traditional universities in our environment. So this is certainly a place where education is looking at the future, a place where those opportunities are also in the immediate environment of our employers, and employability is a big factor at institutions for our students.
So when you're sitting on the hub and you've got so much more of a focus on how hard the transition is, what is UWC doing? How is it already responding to the challenges?
So we know well the national demographics around employability of graduates, and it's important to note that we have a 16% unemployment rate among our graduates, and for those who continue with postgraduate qualifications, it comes down to a 6% unemployment rate, which is a huge jump. So the message for our students is very much to study further and get that postgraduate degree. I mean, that's the one way of becoming more competitive. But of course, universities like UWC also have career services, career centers, and typically in the past, those would have focused on graduate readiness. In other words, in the final year of study, readying the graduate for the market and engaging with industry through career expos and the like. But nowadays, we see there's a shift in trend. We see that employability begins to become a factor right from the first year of studies. And universities are increasingly focused on getting students ready for the world of work and to become self-starters for work from year one.
So you're solving a multitude of problems. One is there isn't even enough work in the market, yet you're solving for the employability of the student. In what regard? How do you see yourselves in collaboration potentially with corporate, with government, starting to implement streams that students can choose in order to find themselves employed after the university?
We used to focus a lot on career expo type events and also on engagements with industry partners. So understanding with the professions like accounting and pharmacy and many others where the gaps are between the curriculum and the workplace. And those engagements with employers occur every year in a university's life. But what we're finding increasingly more important is to link our students to potential employers. So we have a careers hub at UWC, for example. 630 or so of our employers are part of the hub. They are registered on the hub. This is a way for students to access employment as UWC potential alumni also. And because of the reputation of the institution, those are employers that want our graduates. So these kinds of initiatives which bring employers closer to the institution and also create a network for our students accessing the market are really important. But I think given the unemployment stats in our country, what is becoming so critical is that students from the beginning of their curricula have opportunities to develop a work experience portfolio. In other words, a portfolio that in addition to the academic curriculum shows to the potential employer what this person has done in community engagement, what they've done in work opportunities and vacations or internal placements, for example, clinical placements, work integrated learning. In the past, we used to deal with those as fairly discrete. and apart from each other opportunities. But now we have to see employability in a much more coherent way as universities, and start thinking of the potential of the graduate in as much as a work seeker as a work creator, and create those chances for people.
And I think that you've brought the employer closer, and you've brought a student closer to seeing corporates, because they never get to see corporates, right, until the first time they go for a job interview. So you've bridged that gap. But if we look at the continent and we look at education itself, what about its internal evolution of what is teaching, how is teaching it? Because you follow very stringent curricula to demonstrate, this is what this qualification is about. Have you seen there to be a need in the ability to refresh much faster the content that we're giving people to consume?
Zanele, absolutely. I think particularly in the post-COVID years, we've seen how important technology is as a facilitator of learning, but also how it can be used in ways which are disabling for students. So looking more critically at how technology integrates with the curriculum has become a focus of specialization in research itself. We call this the scholarship of teaching and learning. But actually, what is most exciting about it is that it integrates a whole range of technologies into the learning styles of students. The golden bowl or golden aim of education, of course, is that it should ultimately support each individual's learning style. And although that's been theoretically the aspiration, I think through technology, we're seeing that is becoming an actual possibility. Using technology, students can self-pace their learning better. They can self-direct their learning better. One of the interesting stats to emerge from research after COVID was how students with disabilities, for example, found working online much more effective than being in a classroom. Why is that? It's because they could control the pace. They could also have more engagement with academics on a one-on-one basis through the online forums. So we see an enormous potential that has changed the way we think about education. It's also focused much more on ways of teaching, pedagogies, than we would have done in the past. So what I'm seeing, if I look at various institutions in our environment, is that the professionalization of academic teaching has become much more prominent now in the post-COVID period. And that has a benefit for our students ultimately.
And even for the teachers. Last year, when we had the future of work and the future of academic, the big conversation was AI. It was technology. It was how do teachers and lecturers and those who are in the research space embrace technology and utilize it. And also, how does one gauge the learning that a student takes, or the learning that a student is onboarding, considering that they could be using so much technology that fast tracks, what they actually churn back. So you don't really get to hear where the student is at in terms of their own personal learning. How have you bridged that?
Yes, so AI has been an enormous area of innovation, but also contention. And when we talk about AI, we often think of artificial intelligence, but it also stands for academic integrity. So those two forms of AI have to come together. In other words, the responsibility to use AI in a way that is truly enabling of students' capacities and development, but at the same time for students to acknowledge that use of AI in the support of their work. So the focus on artificial intelligence is a continuity of the focus on education technology. It's taken us by leaps and bounds further, not only in terms of how students search for information, but now increasingly how they integrate and synthesize and analyze data, which I think is truly going to transform our curricula. But the integrity issue is absolutely critical because, of course, with every source that we use, there's an obligation in academic work to acknowledge where you got it from.
So, Prof, has the continuum of information or citing of information broadened a little bit? When I was at university, only certain sources could be cited, and credibility was a key thing. And now with the expansion of AI tools and different sources of information, has that loosened a little bit?
Yes, I think it has. It's certainly changed. 10, 15 years ago, the online platforms that were emerging then, Wikipedia and Google Scholar and so on, were kind of regarded with maybe some suspicion. But the focus on open science and open access to academic sources has really also changed the rigor of the processes associated with those online platforms. And so the quality that we're seeing in those spaces has definitely improved. I mean, I think that in many ways the open science movement is a challenge to the traditional publication industry in academia, and in many ways also a democratization of it, a necessary opening of that knowledge base. We always, I think, in academic life used to, think of particular traditional forms of publication, journals and books and so on. But there are now a multitude of other media in which academic information is conveyed, in which insights arising from research is promoted and so on. So this world has changed in terms of not only how we access information, but also how information is promoted and presented. Of course, that all implies that students have to be engaged more thoroughly with the skills of discernment, Zanele, and the skills of analysis. And AI can certainly help with those, but at the same time, we want people to be independent thinkers.
Yeah, we don't want to lose the ability to think independently, but also the criteria for what success looks like requires faith from an academic point of view, is that we have to have faith that this open science somehow will be able to manage and moderate itself, and there won't be too much of a loss of, from a move away from the traditional ways. But a quick question I want to ask you before our time runs up is your interest in really owning and leading this particular conversation with CNBC Africa that's looking at bridging the gap between academia and what the world of work is asking for. Why is it important to you as an institution?
I think it's a wonderful opportunity for UWC in terms of its history. It's been an institution which historically has been placed on the margins and has reinvented itself as cutting edge in terms of science and our humanities. So we have a chance with this event, with this opportunity to really showcase the university. And I'm thrilled to be able to be part of that. It's really exciting for us, and the G20 Summit, of course, and all the events associated with it, I think, are deserving of our support.
Well, it's going to be very interesting. I want to thank you so much for your time. And from the University of the Western Cape, the anchor partner for the event coming up, called Bridging the Academia and Industry Gap, the Future of Workforce Readiness, that was Professor Robert Balfour, Rector and Vice Chancellor at the University of the Western Cape. From me, Zanele Morrison, that's it for our episode of Focus On. We'll be back with you with more conversations, and most importantly, the one on academia and the new world of work. So keep watching CNBC Africa.